So before we start, there's just a few things to kind of think about in terms of writing a trance beat, and a few things you need to kind of decide upon before you really get going. The first of which should really be the tempo and the time signature. So the time signature of all trance music pretty much is 4/4. The tempos tend to range from 128 BPM up to about 145 BPM for some of the faster, harder styles of trance. We're going to go for 135, so somewhere in the middle of that. And one final consideration when making a trance beat is to think about the groove of the piece and the accents that you place with velocity editing, and the groove that you use with either groove templates or by offsetting some of the MIDI notes slightly off the grid so they're not perfectly in time, which will add a sense of swing and a sense of groove to the piece. So with that in mind, let's start making our trance beat. So we're going to start our drum track with the most basic element, which is the kick drum. We're just going to play a 4 to the floor pattern, which basically means a kick is going to play on every beat. So let's program that in now. And just shorten the ends a touch. So that's pretty good. Now for the snare and clap backbeat layer. The snare and clap will generally play on beats 2 and 4, and they will form the backbeat of the groove. The clap sound isn't quite as wide in the stereo field, so that's going to form a good mono center for the layered up samples, and the other one is going to provide a bit of width that is kind of inherent and already there in the sample. So we're going to offset the MIDI notes off the grid slightly on beats 2 and 4. We're just going to push them back ever so slightly to add a bit of a lazier groove feel. And we're also going to flam them against one another. So that basically means offsetting each pitch in the MIDI editor against one another as well. The top sample that you can see is already laid up and already does have a bit of a flam inherent in the sample as well. So by doing this, we're really creating a nice lazy groove. Now moving on to the hi-hat pattern. These are generally programmed in as 16th notes, and they're used really for decoration or to add pace to the trance beat. So in this particular example, we're going to use what's commonly known as a gallop rhythm, and we're just going to put these notes here. We're also going to accent these notes by changing the velocity and make the first one more important. So we're going to accent that first note, and the second one isn't going to be quite as loud. And then I'm going to offset the groove of the second notes in the pairs. I'm just going to pull those back a little bit so that they again have a bit more swing and a bit more groove. Okay, maybe that's just a tiny bit too much, so we'll just pull that back there. So the next element to add in is the open hi-hat. Now that plays on the offbeat and will play at a same velocity each time, and it won't be groove quantized at all. That will stay locked to the grid. And that there is a fairly typical trance rhythm and trance sound. So the next element to program in is the crash sample, and the crash symbol generally signifies the start of a new phrase or a new musical element. So we don't have it every bar, we have it usually every 4, but much more commonly every 8 or every 16 bars. So I'm just going to layer a couple up together here. So now here we have the percussion track. It's usually quite syncopated, quite a syncopated rhythm to infuse that bit of interest and give it that groove and drive. Now the sounds that you use can be electronic or acoustic in nature in this particular part of the kit. It's not too important, it's more important how it integrates with the rest of the track and how it drives the groove on. And there's going to be lots of samples laid up here. We're going to use quite a few from this Indian drum sample pack. And these different voices, having them offset slightly here in the MIDI editor, or the piano roll that's more commonly known, will really allow us to create the sort of sense of an ensemble playing together. And by having these notes slightly offset and slightly flamming against one another, it will really help create that idea that there is a group of people playing that instrument, and it will make it feel bigger and larger than if we had everything perfectly quantized. So now let's give that a little listen and see how it sounds. Okay, that's pretty good. So now for the fill, I'm just going to change the rhythms here slightly, and we're going to do some velocity editing on the new sort of fill element, something that isn't playing the rhythm from the bar before, and they are going to be brought down in volume so they won't be too overbearing. Then what we'll do next is just change the pitches of what the rhythms are playing, so it actually plays a different sounding sample, and by doing that it will really change the nature and the vibe of the fill. Just move those pitches down there, move these up a touch, and do that as well, so that none of the elements of the fill are repeated, only the sounds from the main rhythm from the bar before. All the new elements will sound different each time. So let's give that a little listen. So that's kind of working there. So the next thing we need to do is really have a look at the basic mix of the different voices of the drums. So we'll pull the faders down and we'll mix to the kick, which is the most important element out of all the drum tracks. And then we'll pull that crash sample up there. That's sounding round about right. And next we'll move the backbeat and snare fader up a touch. So that snare and clap are sounding pretty good together. Pull up the hi-hats, you can just be heard, and pull that offbeat hi-hat up next, which should really help drive the track, and now the percussion track as well, which is now a lot quieter than what it was, and that works pretty well. But we'll just move one of these pitches here. It's causing too much of a low end resonance. We'll just change that sample. So that's a bit better there. And there you have it. There is a very basic trance beat to get you underway. In future tutorials we'll look at incorporating some audio samples rather than just the MIDI programming as well, do some more interesting mixing techniques, some sort of standard stuff like compression, EQ, use of delay, reverb, etc. And then we'll look at some more advanced processing, some parallel compression, gated reverb, and we'll also look at some reverse sounds, things of that nature as well as some glitch sampling, which is very exciting. But just to recap, we programmed a kick pattern on every beat of the bar, a snare backbeat or snare clap backbeat on beats 2 and 4, a hi-hat pattern using 16ths for decoration and adding groove and shuffle. We added in a open hi-hat pattern on the offbeat, a syncopated percussion groove as well to drive the track, as well as a crash sample to signify the start of a new musical section. And remember, all the samples that we used in this tutorial are available as part of the resource pack in both EXS24 format and .wavs as well.